Hey guys, welcome back to the House of Gouldians. This is episode 3 of season 3. In today's episode, we're going to take a deep dive into the red-headed Gouldian, or the red-headed classic Gouldian, as it's otherwise known. For today's episode, I'm going to go into the sort of feather structure, pigment, genetics of the bird, and then we're going to look at what's sort of the World Show winner, what that looked like, and sort of pros and cons, if there was any cons on that particular bird. And then from there we're going to go into the majestic bloodline, because the red-headed purple breast is part of the majestic, and we will then discuss where we are in our own breeding of that particular mutation or variation of the bird. Before we get into that though, a huge shout out to the GOWS organization, which is the Gouldian Online World Show, and I say that for this t-shirt, which was a thank you for being one of the judges on the show, and it was my privilege to be involved in that show this past year in 2023, and to be able to judge birds from all over the world. So while it was very unnecessary, it is hugely appreciated, and this really is a stunning shirt. As you can see, it's a theme from 2023 with all the sponsors and all that kind of thing on the back, and it's really a stunning memento from the show. So I really do appreciate it, and I'll certainly be wearing it when I'm judging shows going forward, and also a little bit on this channel and that kind of thing. So yeah, it's hugely appreciated, and thank you to the founder of GOWS, Ahmed, for the very generous gift. I do appreciate it. Alright, so with that being said, I'd like to now move into the education segment of the show so that we can discuss some of the genetics around the red-headed Gouldian. In order to understand the red-headed bird, we need to understand first and foremost what's going on with the sort of makeup of some of the color panels of the bird. In terms of the head of the bird, there's a couple of pigmentations at play. So your primary bird, if you like, the black-headed classic, has nothing really but melanin in the main mask, the black area, in other words, on the head of the bird. And then the other head colors have not only the black pigment, but they also have your phenylalanine, which is like a very dark brown, almost maroon color, and then you've got your red pigment. Now I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce the Latin word for that, because yeah, I get it horribly wrong every time, but I will post the 3 different types as you can see next to me here. So the top one is E-melanin, which is your black. Then you get your phenylalanine, which is a brown, very dark brown, almost maroon, and then you get your red pigment. Now it's a mixture of those that give you your red and your orange, and on the orange is like a burnt orange, which is more lutein side of it coming into play as well. But those pigments are your kind of primary pigments, if you like, that make up your different head colors. Now today we're discussing the red-headed Gouldian and the genetics behind that. So you get, with human beings, myself as a male would have an X and a Y chromosome, and a female in human beings would be a double X chromosome essentially. Now birds are the other way around, where your hen carries first of all, with birds it's Z and W, so it's not X and Y, but essentially it's the opposite to human beings, in that your female is carrying your Z and your W, whereas your male is carrying 2 copies of the same. Okay, so what happens there is that when we talk sex-linked genetics, what it means is that the hens can only carry a single copy of that particular aspect of the color of the bird. So whether it be a sex linked on the back colour or head colour. So she can't be green and yellow, for example, whereas a cockbird can be carrying both the green and yellow genes, and then dependent on other factors in terms of dominance and codominance and that kind of stuff, you'll get varying sort of degrees of colour that comes out based on how those genes interact with each other. So I don't want to confuse you on back colours and that. We're discussing head colours today, so we're talking specifically the red-headed. Now, why I mentioned the two sort of genes, if you like, is that your cockbird can be a carrier for, be a visual red-headed bird, but be a carrier for blackhead, essentially. Whereas your hen, it's either or. It's either she's a red-headed bird or she's a black-headed bird. She cannot be both, unlike the cock. When we get to the orange-headed birds in 2 episodes' time, it gets a lot more complicated because you've got that dynamic at play, but then you've also got a proper recessive gene at play, which both the hen and the cock can be carriers for. So that gets a little bit more complicated, but we'll get to that in 2 episodes' time. So coming back to the red-head, we said that you can get essentially a cock that is carrying 2 copies of the gene, or is double factor for red-head. And then in the hen's case, it's a single factor at any time. She cannot be carrying 2 copies of the gene. It's either or red-headed or black-headed. So now, what does that mean in terms of our breeding? So, a red-headed cockbird, if it's carrying double factor, in other words, both copies of red-head, he's not carrying the black-head. All his chicks that are produced, if paired up to a red-headed hen or a black-headed hen, would effectively be visual redheads. If that cockbird was now carrying 1 copy of black-headed gene, genetics, so he's a visual redhead but he's carrying the black-head, hen offspring could be black-headed if paired up to a red-headed hen. If paired up to a black-headed hen, it gets more interesting because now your cockbirds can be black-headed or red-headed carrying black-headed, or in terms of the hens would be black-headed and you would get some red-headed hens as well. So it means that you can get quite a diverse clutch of youngsters in terms of the head color. Now, when we talk about statistical odds with genes, it's a roll of the dice. Please don't forget that. So you'll hear, or if you look up on the genetic websites, you'll see it will say 75% of the chicks will be redhead, for example, or 25% will be blackhead, whatever the case might be. But remember, that is if you could breed 100 chicks off a single pair. That's what you should end up with. So 75 would be redhead and 25% would be blackhead. But in reality, it's a roll of the dice because you're only breeding 6 birds at a time, and or maybe 8 if you're lucky. But the point is that it's a roll of the dice per egg. So you've got a 75% chance of producing a red-headed offspring from a split for black-headed cock versus a red-headed hen. But you've got a 25% chance of producing a black-headed hen in that particular pairing. And it's that roll of the dice that we're referring to. So, it may not happen. You could end up producing all redheads, or you might be lucky or unlucky, depends how you look at it, and produce all black-headed hens. You don't know how the dice will, or the genetic will fall per egg. Okay, but statistically, that's what you can expect. Right, so now that we've discussed the genetics, we said we will move on to our majestic bloodline and where are we there. So this bird that I'm popping up now is the winner of the World Show for 2023. It is a very nice example of a red-headed bird. and you'll notice how broad the head is and how rounded the head is. Now, there is a difference between the standard used in Spain, this bird is from Spain, and standards found elsewhere in the world. Generally speaking, Europe and that is moving more towards this type of bird, and the southern hemisphere we're quite far behind on our birds, but we don't necessarily want them as big as the Spanish birds in terms of, and quite that robustness, a little bit heavier than our standard suggests they should be. But what we do want is to eliminate our flatheads in our flock. We want that rounded look to the head, and we want the broadness of the head. We don't want sort of arrow-headed birds and that kind of thing. Okay, so how do our birds compare to the world champion? So as you can see by the first pairing, our birds have a lot less robustness to them. So for the majestic bloodline, we want to work on that. We want a broader bird, a fuller bird, and we want a bird with a broader head and a more rounded head. We don't want sort of an arrow look. None of my red-headed pairings are flat-headed birds, so we've managed to eliminate that. But there's still work to be done, as you can see if you think back to that video that I just showed you on the world show winner. The first pairing that I've shown you, they have laid one, or at least they've had one chick that has been run. The other eggs, they were fertile, but they did not hatch. Now, what I suspect happened there is that it was a clutch of 7 eggs, and then I added one from another pairing where the parents were building, well, they had abandoned the nest basically. So I redistributed the eggs to 2 other pairs, and this nest was one of them. So it ended up with a nest clutch of 8. And that is a little bit on the bigger side for the Gouldians. So what I think happened in this case is that the eggs were around the outside at some point and got cold because the hen wasn't able to properly cover all 8 eggs. The one egg that hatched was probably an egg that happened to kind of always be in the middle, just the way the eggs were turned and that kind of thing, and that was the reason for it being the only survivor, given that all the eggs were fertile. What I will do in another week or so's time, once that little one is basically ready to fledge, I will crack open those other eggs, and if I'm right about my theory, I should see that there's different levels of development as each egg kind of got cold along the process and then died at that point. So they shouldn't all be dead at the same point in development in shell. Alright, so that's that particular pairing and where we are. The offspring I'm hoping will be a little bit more robust, but in terms of their sort of width or girth, if you like, but as tall as the cockbird is, so that we're still getting the length of the bird, but we're getting a little bit more a stocky bird. And also the hope would be that the head is a little bit better, and we can slowly progress with our bloodline in terms of this pairing. The next pair you'll see, this particular pairing, the hen is a lot more stocky or cobby than the cockbird. He's a lot taller though, and she's not really a small bird, it's just he is a tall bird, let's put it that way. But he's quite a lot thinner than her, so I'm really hoping that her cobbiness sort of comes across, but they keep the size. Head-wise, they're okay, they're not bad, they're heading in the right direction, they're not flat-headed. This pairing, however, they did lay a clutch of eggs, but unfortunately none of those eggs were proved viable. The one was dead in shell and the others were infertile. I suspect that it may have been that it was a little bit early in the season for them. They were kind of coming into condition, but they weren't quite there yet, which often happens with the first clutch. Second clutch tends to be a higher fertility rate, and it's purely about that timing. One or the other bird wasn't quite ready, even though it appeared to be ready to breed. So yeah, I suspect the next clutch will go off without a hitch on both the two pairings that we've already looked at. Moving on to the third pairing. So this cockbird, you'll notice the hen is missing, and I'll get to her now. But the cockbird, he is a little bit on the thin side compared to the others that we looked at. This particular bird is a yellow rump, but remember what we said about the yellow rumps. If they're not visual, then they're not a yellow rump, and a single yellow rump parent will produce some yellow rumps and some normals. So I chose to use him as my third option because he was better than the other red-headed bird choices that I had available to me in terms of cocks. The hen, however, that I've put him to is quite a nice, robust bird. Her head is not as nice, but what I liked about her is that, or why I chose her, should I say, besides the robustness, is that she was a bit of a dark masked bird, which is not ideal for a show bench perspective. But what I'm effectively hoping will happen is that black line that goes behind the mask will become a little bit thicker, because on the cockbird it's a little bit on the thin side. So that was the kind of the thinking behind that pairing. I might prove incorrect and it doesn't work, but we're trying to fix various aspects at the same time. So we can't just focus on type. We also need to make sure that we're breeding the correct markings and the correct color of the bird. We never want to lose sight of that, because that's a primary aspect of the Gouldian finches. So that's the sort of thinking behind the 3 pairings. At this stage we've only got the 1 chick to show for the 3 pairings, but it's early in the season, so I'm really not worried. And the pair that I've just shown you, they are on eggs at the moment. There's 5 eggs in the box, so in another week and a half or week's time we should see some chicks from them, and hopefully they turn out to be nice parents. They are first time breeders for me, so even though they're mature enough to breed, I don't know how they're going to be as parents, and that's part of Gouldian keeping. I don't use Bengalese if I can help it. I prefer to naturally raise, but it is a bit of a roll of the dice the first time you're breeding them, a particular pair, because you don't know if they are going to be good parents or not. Alright, so that's kind of where we're at. Just in general in the room, we were doing quite well on the egg count last time, but we hadn't really started ringing birds. At this point, as things currently stand, I've rung 9 birds. There's another box of 6 that will be rung shortly, and that's an orange-headed pair. So once that's rung, we would have already had 14 orange-headed of our orange-head classics produced this season. So 14 chicks is great. It's 2 nests of 6 and 1 nest of 2. On the black-headed side, we haven't had much success yet, unfortunately, but they are in various stages of laying eggs and incubating and that kind of thing, so I suspect that we will have chicks fairly soon. In terms of our projects, so we move on to the commoners now. The commoners, we've got the blue pairings. Unfortunately, we had those 3 chicks from the blue pair that we had put under Bengalese at a friend of mine's place, but unfortunately just before I started filming today he notified me that those chicks had died mysteriously. They had been with him for about 10 days, they were growing nicely, and then all of a sudden something went wrong. So I don't know if the Bengalese suddenly stopped feeding or what happened. Bengalese are great, but they sometimes do make mistakes, and this is one of those examples. One of those things. So yeah, we move on in terms of that. The 1 blue pairing, I did separate them at this point, and the reason being is that the pastel cockbird lost his tail and seemed to go into a second molt. So I'll put him one side for now. Once he's through the molt, I'll repair him, and hopefully he'll still breed for us this season. The 3rd pair of blues, however, are currently in the process of laying eggs. They haven't started incubating yet, so hopefully they will, and they won't just be egg droppers, which can happen with a younger pairing. And in this case, the cockbird is a young bird, so he is, I'm breaking that rule that I said I only breed second year. He is a 1-year-old, and therefore we could have some problems. In terms of the yellows, I'm very happy to report that out of 3 pairs, we've got 2 that have chicks. The one's got, well, both pairs actually have 2 chicks each. So yeah, we've got 4 chicks theoretically that are on their way. The 1 pair is almost at a size that I can ring them. The other pair is about 3 days old, so they're still a little bit on the small side. In terms of the pied side, those 3 eggs haven't hatched yet. It's a little bit soon still, but we do have 1 pair that has laid eggs, and we're hoping to produce some possible splits, which we can then pair back and hopefully get some visuals when we pair them back to the 100% splits that we do have from last season. So that's the room and where we're at, and I hope you enjoyed today's episode.